Morning. This talk is the HTML treasure hunt, because I'm guessing that a lot of you write JavaScript that actually, in the end, puts HTML into somebody's browser. And here are some useful things you should know. My bona fides, I am one of the editors of the HTML specification, the HTML 5.3 spec. I have the pleasure that I invented the picture element for responsive images. I tried to call it the Bruce element, but they wouldn't let me. I was one of the team who had the exciting 2,500 years in the BS 8878 committee, which is the British standard for commissioning accessible websites. Those are websites that people with disabilities can use. And I co-wrote Introducing HTML5 and this book about web accessibility, but don't buy them because they're really old and there's better books out there. But if you can get an Asian-priced PDF on the web, go for it. I'm Bruce Lawson, and I am an HTML-caholic. Actually, this is a brand of fashion wear in Tokyo. So I had to go into the department store and lie down in front of it and then get the police to take me away. HTML is often thought of by people who are proper developers as not really a language, and I agree it's not a programming language, but it is foundational and nobody knows enough about HTML. It is full of buried treasure, and if you dig deep, you will be rewarded with great riches. So, what does the treasure involve? You will get more performant sites, which is good for your users because they load faster, and it's great for your bosses or your clients because sites that load slowly, we know, don't convert as well. So if you make the sites faster by writing better HTML, your boss will erect a 20-meter statue of you in the work car park, gold-plated, guaranteed, or Sebastian will give you your conference money back. Not me, I'm just a hired hand. Your sites will be more accessible. Therefore, you're at less risk of discriminating against people with a disability, which is almost certainly illegal and is definitely a bad thing to do. And as I will show you, sites that are more accessible are more usable by everybody and therefore convert better. And they will be more robust because there are times when JavaScript doesn't work for everybody. And your sites will work better in those times. But that's benefits for your users and your bosses. Hi, morning, you've missed the good bits. It's also better for you because you've got less code to write, because you are not paid, excuse me, by the kilobyte. You're paid by the project. So if you write less, then you're getting paid more. You've got less code to test because, hands up who loves doing testing. Okay. Whoa, phone the police. No, it's great, but most people don't like testing. I don't like testing. And because you're doing less writing, because you're doing less testing, therefore you get to go to the pub earlier on a Friday night, and that is every developer's human right. Or if you're not a pub goer, you get more time to play Call of Duty or more time to see your kids, boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, whatever. In other words, it's good for everybody. So, what's the treasure map? How do we go about this? Very simple. Use HTML properly. I will show you how. Write more HTML. Use CSS properly. CSS in JS is a terrible hack. CSS is a great thing of beauty, as is HTML. And remember, built-in beats bolt-on bigly. What I mean by this is if you get something for free in HTML, you're wasting your time replicating that in JavaScript. You're wasting your time replicating behavior that's in browsers that's been written in super optimized C++. you're wasting your time replicating that in JavaScript. It will never be as fast, it will never be as robust, it won't be cross-browser, and you don't get to go to the pub on time. Now, I'm not against JavaScript, God knows. I'm not against frameworks. In Bucharest, I saw this graffiti saying, React, run! But I'm not scared of React. Until recently, I was working on a project, an open source library, to allow you to use vanilla CSS to style your React, stylable.io. It's BDSM licensed. I commend it to you. I'm not against Angular, I'm not against Ember. Just remember, those things are just tools. Yes, they are big, well-known tools, but nevertheless, they're just tools. If you want to use React Angular Bootstrap Hubpack.js, go for it. It's great. Just make sure that the HTML that eventually gets spat out at the end is good HTML. Who likes furniture? Come on, everyone likes furniture, because you're sitting on furniture. I like furniture. I spend many a happy hour in IKEA. This is the Bible of furniture manufacture. Since 1970, the technique of furniture making has established itself as the Bible for all woodworkers. And in the introduction, it said, we must deal primarily with the basic handcrafts, because all a machine can ever do is translate the essential hand operations into rotary movements. In other words, if you are using a machine like a library, if you don't understand the raw materials, the machine is not going to write better code for you. And the author says, okay, in these days of mechanization, it's still important. If you have to saw a piece of wood by hand, you will be more likely to know that much more about it. You'll have greater respect for it and will understand in greater depth the problems that have to be faced in its manipulation. And that's why in the book about furniture making, the first 100 pages has nothing to do with making furniture. It has lots of tables about the humidity content of different kinds of wood, which cuts of the wood are the most robust, what the different grains mean. If you're trying to build something, it's vital to understand the raw materials. There's another book I like, Japanese Woodworking Tools by Mr. Toshio Odate. And he says, the Japanese word shakunin is defined by both Japanese and Japanese English dictionaries as craftsman or artisan, but such a literal description does not fully express the deeper meaning. A shakunin means not only having technical skill, but also implies an attitude and social consciousness, a social obligation to work his best for the general welfare of the people, an obligation both material and spiritual. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Look at this guy, he's got bare feet, he's got a 1960s shirt he had made in India, he's talking about spiritual stuff, hippie bullshit, you're thinking. But this is entirely in the spirit of the web. Have you all heard of this guy, Sir Uncle Timbo? I can call him Sir Uncle Timbo because once he asked me to sign a copy of my HTML5 book, and no one was around with a camera. Sad. Anyway, Sir Uncle Timbo said in 2012 at the opening of the London Olympics, this is for everyone. And he meant it. He didn't patent the web. It's built on open standards. It's given away free. The man put his money where his mouth is. It's for everyone. And it was. This is the first ever web page running in a modern version of Chrome. And you can see that it is, out of the box, entirely responsive. Totally responsive. And when I tab through the links, I can see where I am with that focus ring. And when I click on a link, it goes somewhere. Responsive. Accessible, out of the box. And developers, we broke it. We chose to break it. We broke it by deciding pre-mobile, when everybody had big monitors, we broke it by making websites at a fixed width. You remember the early days of the iPhone when you had to scroll horizontally on those fixed width sites? We broke it by choosing bad contrast. I am an old fella. I know I don't look it, I know I look lovely and young, but I'm actually closer to 100 than I am to 0. And my eyes need glasses, and I can't tell you how sick I am of tiny grey writing on a white background. Stop it. Pixel perfect layout, trying to pretend that the web is print. It's not. Lack of captions for videos, we've all done that. Lack of keyboard accessibility. Anybody who doesn't believe that people surf the web using only their keyboard, I challenge you to never use a keyboard shortcut in your IDE again and see how you like it. You'll hate it. And we broke it by removing the focus indicator. This is the ring that a browser gives you by default when you're focused on something. With one line of CSS, if you are totally evil, you can remove that, and then a keyboard user, like me, because I have multiple sclerosis, so my motor control isn't great, I don't know where I am in the page. You can do that if you're evil. And we did it because we forgot about the raw materials of the web, and the raw materials are JavaScript, HTML, currently version 5, and CSS, currently version 3, and it will always be version 3. As represented by Brendan Eich, who invented JavaScript in 10 days. How come William Lee, who invented CSS with Bert Boss, and me, because Tim Berners-Lee wasn't available? But notice, we're all having a beer together and getting on. None of us are fighting. Okay, well, after about the 7th pint, it did kick off. But no, we're all friends because these 3 foundational technologies work together. But the emphasis is the word together. Just because you know JavaScript doesn't mean you can forget about HTML and CSS. Just because you know CSS doesn't mean you don't have to know JavaScript. This is a recent Medium post that made me so furious. I've taken the person's name off it, because I'm not trying to get a pile on to him or her, because this is more indicative of a wider problem in our industry. 10 things to learn for becoming a solid full-stack JavaScript developer. The top 4 have a fundamental understanding of JavaScript. Of course. Of course, you can't do any full-stack JavaScript development or full-stack any web development, for that matter, without learning JavaScript. This is self-evident. A front-end framework. Apparently, to be a good JavaScript developer, you must learn a front-end framework. I disagree. You can learn one, it can be great, but you don't have to be a good JS dev. Bootstrap 4. What? And then, kind of as an afterthought, HTML and CSS. The author says, as for HTML, there's not much to learn right away, and you can kind of learn as you go along. But before making your first templates, know the difference between elements like span and div. And this will save you a huge amount of headache when fiddling with your CSS code. This is really dismissive. HTML is much more than div or span. And if you know how to use them, your sites will be better. So we're going to have a look at the raw materials. We're going to investigate the wood. HTML is declarative. You know this. You say, give me a button, and a button miraculously appears. You don't need to know how that happens. You just command it like a lord, and it works. This is great. But what maybe you didn't know is not only a button appears, but that button is focusable by default. You can hit the tab key, and you can tab to that button. And you can hit the space bar or the enter key, and that button is activated without you doing a thing in all browsers. HTML is fault tolerant. The blink element was implemented in Netscape and never implemented in IE. But when IE saw the blink element, it would show the content in the middle. It didn't vomit, it didn't barf, it didn't blink, but you got the content, because that's what the site's there for. With HTML and CSS, if the browser meets something it doesn't recognize, it carries on and shows the content of the tag as if the unknown tag weren't there. This is super powerful. So it means that HTML is backwards compatible. When How Come William Lee, Mr. CSS, invented the video element, it looked like this. In IE 6, which was the primary browser at the time, 7 and 8, which doesn't understand the video element, It didn't barf, it didn't stop, it just showed the content of the tag. So in IE8, you didn't get an embedded video, but you got a link to the video which you could download and watch on your OS video player. The content still delivered because HTML is backwards compatible. So when I invented the picture element, I paved that cowpath. So with a picture element, I can say, use tiny.webp if you understand the WebP format, because that is 25 to 34% smaller for the same quality as a JPEG. So in a browser that doesn't understand the picture element and doesn't understand the source element, it will show the content, and everybody gets the JPEG. Nobody loses out. In a browser that does understand the picture element but doesn't understand WebP, it will go back to the JPEG. Nobody loses out. And in a modern browser like Firefox or the Chromium browsers, it will show tiny.webp instead of small.jpg, which is 25 to 34% smaller. When I did a talk in Bristol in the UK a couple of years ago about responsive images, the picture element, a guy in the audience went and implemented it on his business site, and the page was 70% smaller for exactly the same image quality. This is a trivial thing to do if you know it exists. So HTML is backwards compatible. I showed you the first ever web page in a modern browser. This is my personal site in the first ever web browser that Sir Uncle Timbo wrote. It's not the nicest of UIs, but there I am going to my website, hit open. There's no pictures, there's no branding, but all the content is there. And this browser was written 25 years ago. This is what HTML gives you. And HTML is interoperable. Here I badly nested. I've opened a B, I've opened an I, and I'm closing my B before the I. Before HTML5, in Safari and IE, you got a different DOM from in Chrome and Firefox and Opera. A different DOM. Which meant that if you were writing JavaScript that traversed the DOM, you would get a massive headache, you would start to swear, you would cry, and then you'd wish you'd done a different job. But in HTML5, nobody was wrong, by the way, because the HTML4 spec only ever told you what to do with good markup, with valid markup. I can see looking at you that none of you has ever written invalid code because you're all total geniuses, but there must be a loser on your team who's once made a syntax error. In HTML5, there's a parsing algorithm that is guaranteed with whatever combination of misnested markup you get, it will always produce the same DOM. It might not be the DOM that you wanted to produce, but it will produce the same DOM across all browsers. This is like an HTML5 ninja. Nobody sees the HTML5 parsing algorithm, but it's super powerful because it guarantees interoperability. By contrast, JavaScript isn't declarative. You know that you have to tell the machine what to do. You can't just say, make it thus. You have to say, make it thus and do it this way. And therefore, it is not fault tolerant. You get an error, your JavaScript will just die. And that's okay. But it means that you want to eliminate as much of the fragile code as you can and put as much as you can into the more robust levels of the web stack. Sir Uncle Timbo, in his Principles for the Web, back in the days when Mozart was alive and dinosaurs rode penny farthings, he said the choice of language is a common design choice. The low power end of the scale is typically simpler to design, implement, and use. The high power end of the scale has all the attraction of being an open-ended hook into which anything can be placed. A door to use is bounded only by the imagination of the programmer. I put it to you that although you are experts in writing imperative programming, you should try and only do that for things you cannot do in the lower level languages like HTML and CSS, because they're less powerful, so they're more robust. In other words, use the right tools for the right job. 13 million requests for JavaScript will time out, said a developer at BuzzFeed. And BuzzFeed isn't heavily used by people in emerging economies. BuzzFeed is heavily used by people in the West, all of whom have fast internet connections, unlimited bandwidth, etc. As Phil Hawksworth, who spoke here yesterday, said when he was at a conference, the BuzzFeed people say 1% of requests for JavaScript on BuzzFeed time out. That's 13 million requests per month. The reminder that we should design for resilience. And this has happened to you when you're on your mobile phone and you're going into the London Underground or the tram in Amsterdam or somewhere where there's a lot of people in high buildings. You've all seen JavaScript not working. Yet you don't surf without JavaScript. A friend of mine called Stuart Langridge made this web page. Everyone has JavaScript, right? And then lists all the reasons why any one of us with a high-powered device with all-you-can-eat broadband in the West might not have JavaScript. And if the simplest interactions on your website, like making a button, are in JavaScript, this will fail. People taking pictures, by the way, later on, before I fly to Lithuania, I'll post this slide deck with all the links so you can grab it. It's Bruce L. on Twitter, and then you can grab the deck. Warning, there are bees. Yes, HTML is full of freebies for you. That's a joke, you can smile. Thank you. Here's a demo. We've all had to code this. Check if you don't want not to opt out of cancelling or stopping sending you spam forever. We've all seen that. These two look almost identical, maybe with a slightly different amount of padding between the checkbox and the text. The first one is done badly. I am trying to click into all that text and nothing happens. So I have to click into the little checkbox. With this one, I can click anywhere in the label and the checkbox is full. This is great for me because I have MS, so my motor control isn't great. But it's great for you if you have a stubby finger and a phone screen and you're on a bumpy train. This is good for everybody, and this is terrible. And the simple difference is one uses correct HTML and the other one doesn't. The first one is input type equals checkbox, and then the pseudo label is just a span. The second one, I'm wrapping the checkbox with a label. Okay, that's 4 characters, that's 5 characters. But if you're going to get worried about one extra character down the wire, have a look at your hero images. And this one is just more accessible to everybody out of the box if your JavaScript writes the correct HTML. That's all you have to do. It's free. Because the way it works, your application, not only does the browser make a DOM, a document object model from your HTML, it makes an accessibility tree. And the accessibility tree is passed to the operating system. So if you have, for example, a checkbox in a Windows-based browser, that is telling the operating system, this is a checkbox just like a native one. And then if you're using assistive technology, like a screen reader, but many people with disabilities don't use an assistive technology, I don't, and then the user will be told by the assistive technology, this is a checkbox. Or this is a slider, or this is a button, because you've given it the right HTML, and therefore it's passed through. If you do this, and you style it to look like a button, and you also remember that you've got to set the ARIA role in either JavaScript or HTML, and you also remember that you have to make it focusable, because a div is not by default focusable, and you also remember to listen for the correct key presses, so listen for 32 and 13, because that's spacebar and enter. If you do all of this, this is still not communicated to the OS that it's a button. You've made it look like a button, you've made it act like a button, but the end user of the assistive technology has no idea that this is a button. We've all seen this in HTML4. This could be anything. This could, there's your banner, there's your nav, there's your footer. Down here in tiny font is the accessibility link, carefully hidden from the people who need it most. And here are your articles. An article could be a news item on the BBC. It could be a book on Amazon. It could be a video on YouTube. It could be an attractive gold sovereign ring on the Argos website. It could be anything. But the point is, this is all just divs. It looks like these are different regions, but they're just divs. And the div element, by specification, has no special meaning at all. Authors are strongly encouraged to view the div element as an element of last resort for when no other element is suitable. Use of a more appropriate elements instead of the div leads to better accessibility for readers and easier maintainability for authors. So in HTML5, we gave you these new tags: header, nav, main for the main content, and footer. A friend of mine, Leonie, who you will hear in a minute, she went blind in her 20s. She was a web designer, and she uses a screen reader. And the great thing for her, and any screen reader user, is you can hit M on your keyboard and jump directly to the main content. Or you can hit an N and jump directly to the nav, because it's given the right tags. This is free for you. You don't have to do anything else except when you're writing something that omits the header, you use header class equals header rather than div class equals header, and thereby you're making people's lives better. In a survey last year of screen reader users, how often do you navigate by landmarks and regions? That is nav, main, footer, header. Whenever they're available, 25%, often 18%, sometimes 28%. So you're making the life of screen reader users much better for free, with no cost to you. This is, I did a webinar for Smashing Magazine 2 months ago, and I asked Leonie Watson, this blind web developer, to show us how she navigated some sites. And I asked her to do my personal site, not because it's like the best thing in the world, but because I'm not in for naming and shaming other people, so I volunteered myself. And this is, it's a minute and a half, I think. This is her talking as she encounters my site for the first time.
Firefox, Bruce Lawson's personal site, 27 regions, 21 headings and 187 links. Bruce Lawson's personal site, visited heading level 1 link, Bruce Lawson's.
So I'm going to stop that there. First thing you learn when you've got a screen reader is the key to stop it talking. There is only so much talking in your ear you can cope with during the course of the day. And in most screen readers, the control key is what will stop it talking. What you heard then was the screen reader do several things as the page loaded. It told me the title of the site, Bruce Lawson's personal site. That's the bit that's contained in the title element inside the header elements on the page. These days, I understand in the visual appearance of browsers, that's not a very visible piece of information. Back in the day when I last saw a browser, the title was very often displayed quite prominently at the top of the browser window. But for a screen reader user, it's still the first piece of information that you encounter on the page, and it's incredibly useful because it's often the first guarantee or first confirmation that you've got that you've ended up on the page that you intended to reach. You might also have heard that the screen reader then just gave a quick summary of some of the key elements on the page. It told me there were some regions on the page and some headings. So already that's given me a bit of a clue as to how I can start exploring this page. One thing you can't do as a blind screen reader user is take in the page at a whole glance. When most sighted people look at a page, they'll kind of notice, yep, I can see the header and the footer and maybe the navigation off to one side and a content area somewhere. But of course, you can't do that sort of holistic assessment of a page as a screen reader user. What you can do, though, is use the regions of a page. So in JAWS, if I hit the R key, we'll start to explore the page in regional chunks like this.
Navigation region.
So it tells me there's a navigation region on the page, and if I hit that key again...
Search this site clickable, search region.
I've got a search region on the page.
Main region.
A main region, which tells me, all things being equal, that's the main content area of the page.
Heading level 2 link reading list, banner.
And then I come to a banner area, so something that's using the
alert, Laura
element.
has left the meet.
Etc. You can see how that makes it easier for a blind person. I'm blind, so I can't see that. It says 10 minutes. Mr. Google said 2 weeks ago, when you add markup to your content, you help search engines understand the different components of a page. When Google systems understand your page more clearly, Google Search can surface content through the cool features discussed in the post, which can enhance the user experience and get you more traffic. Hands up if you've had a client who says, please hide me from Google. Hands up if you've had a client who says, can you make me more visible on the search engines? Okay, watch this. And Mr. Google said this month they showed some actual numbers. So Eventbrite used structured data, so 100% increase in year-on-year in growth. Job Rapido saw 115% increase in organic growth, 270%, blah, 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 blah. Big numbers. This is how you do it. In my personal website, and I hasten to add, this is not like the best thing in the world. It's just that I'm too stupid to understand specifications. So when I was trying to learn HTML5, I just used my personal site as a playground. But you can see when I have an article, I've got item type, and I've said this type on schema.org is a blog posting. Schema.org is run by Bing, Google, Yandex, which is Russia's biggest search engine, and Baidu, which is China's biggest search engine. And they have a schema for almost any kind of content you can imagine. You want medical products, you want movies, you want recipes, it's all there. And then all I've done, so for example, I've said that the time of this posting, I'm using the time element. The property of this item is it's the date created, it's the date published, and it's the pub date. And this gets me better search engine results, as Google have said. And it has another great impact. It made my code future-proof. Last year at the big Apple Fest, they announced iWatch, the next version of it, which actually had Safari Reader on it. And they said, because that screen is so tiny, how to make sure the content displays best. They will look for an article tag, and it will be displayed thus. And because my site used HTML5, it looks great. They will use the item prop title, author, subheading, and pub date in order to surface the content thus. If you have an image with a caption, wrap it in a figure element, and it will look great on the iWatch. If you have inputs, input type equals tel, gives you that keyboard, equals input type equals date, gives you that keyboard, etc. Makes it much more usable. But you ask, okay, Bruce, you are a well-known fashion blogger. This is from what's Bruce wearing today.tumblr.com. I can recommend it if you don't know what to wear for an important event or a work meeting or party. Okay, Bruce, you are a famous fashion blogger, but you are not beautiful and you are not glamorous. How did you get early access to the iWatch? Because that is only, by law, worn by beautiful and glamorous people. The answer is, I didn't get early access to the iWatch beta. In fact, I'd done that markup 5 years before the iWatch was invented. But because I chose to use HTML the right way, when a new type of device, like a watch browser, comes on board, my site has been future-proofed. Accessibility is part of usability. There's evidence to show that if you make sites available for people with disabilities, they are more useful to people who are not disabled. I'm running out of time, but Schmutzer, Sonderegger, and Slaurer from Switzerland did tests with 61 non-disabled participants, and they found that high accessibility improved user ratings, perceived usability, aesthetics, workload, and trustworthiness compared to low web accessibility for people who do not have accessibility needs, i.e. everybody. My friend Jamie Knight, who's a senior researcher at the BBC and is an autistic developer who often can't speak and travels everywhere with his cuddly lion, he said, "No one comes to our site disabled. They come with impairments and we disable them." Remember, where the fluffy bunny of good HTML goes, the Tweety bird of accessibility goes with it. If you take nothing home from this talk, apart from that, take this image home. Good markup is better search engine results, it's better usability for all, and it's a better experience for people with disabilities. So Uncle Timbo said last year, "The web is for everyone, and collectively we hold the power to change it. It won't be easy, but if we dream a little and work a lot, we can get the web we want." What can you do? You can learn the semantics of HTML, not just div and span. There are 120-ish elements, that's all, most of which are old, like center tag and stuff. If you think that's a lot to learn, most 2-year-olds know about 100 words. By the time your toddler is 2.5, she'll probably know close to 300. Make your HTML vocabulary better than a 2.5-year-old's vocabulary. I challenge you. I reckon you can do that. Think about, but don't stress about accessibility, because where the fluffy bunny of good HTML goes, the Tweety bird of accessibility rides happily on its back. Use HTML and CSS wherever possible. Of course, use JavaScript, but use it to do things that HTML and CSS can't. And make sites that work without JavaScript, if you can, and enhance them with JS. And choose your libraries carefully. If you're using like a React component library, some friends of mine, Tenon, have released a library that they have tested with people with disabilities. They guarantee it is keyboard accessible. They guarantee it works with all screen readers. It's free and open source. Take it. Use your own CSS. Don't stress. Or choose a bad library like react-bootstrap, which their navigation component doesn't even use a nav element. So all the glory of the nav element is gone. A lot of us, me too, is guilty of this. Too much JavaScript. As time goes by, we're throwing more and more JavaScript down the wire. The median mobile website throws 384K of JS down the wire. And as Alex Russell from Google said, we cannot continue to use as much JavaScript as is now normal and expect the web to flourish. To get this fixed, we need to confront the developer experience bait and switch. In other words, if you're sending loads of JavaScript down the wire because you're using a library that makes your job easier, you are making other people pay. Alex said, tools that cost the poorest users to pay wealthy developers are bunk. And because most of the world is coming on mobile from the developing world, this costs money. In Germany, to afford an entry-level mobile broadband package of 500 megabytes per month, you have to work 1 hour at minimum wage. In the US, to afford entry-level broadband, mobile broadband, you have to work 6 hours. In Nigeria, you have to work 28 hours, and in Brazil, you have to work 34 hours for 500 megabytes of mobile data. So if you are not compressing your images using the picture tag, if you are sending lots of unnecessary JavaScript down the wire, you are making people work harder, and that is rude. In Nigeria, the data needed to watch 2 minutes of online video a day can cost more than sending a child to school for a month. I know that lovely hero video of your sexy office is gorgeous, but it is not better than a Nigerian child's education. I'm sorry. Your React app will never load faster than 1.1 seconds on an average phone in India, no matter how much you optimize it. Your Angular app will always take at least 2.7 seconds to boot up. There's 1.1 billion people in the world like us with high-speed internet. There are 3.2 billion people in the world who are on the web. 5.2 billion mobiles in the world, and 7 billion people in the world are within mobile coverage. So there's 4 billion people yet to bring to the web. By 2100, 50% of the world's population will live in these 10 countries, only one of which is what we would call, rather patronizingly, the developed world. But these people have a massive young demographic, a burgeoning middle class with an ever-increasing disposable income who want to buy goods and services, probably the goods and services that your clients or companies make. Don't lock them out. Developing countries are home to 94% of the global offline population. The World Bank said, making the internet universally accessible and affordable should be a global priority. There are people, I've met them, in sub-Saharan Africa who have to walk miles to see a doctor. But with a feature phone, they can access this village healthcare handbook where there is no doctor from UNICEF translated into their local language, and this saves lives. It is first-line medical care. There are people in Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, who cannot afford school textbooks, but with a feature phone and worldreader.com, they can access free textbooks on the web. There are people in horrible, despotic, totalitarian regimes where they are not allowed to have the wrong political opinion, the wrong religion, or have sex with the wrong gender. And access to the web is their only way to see the free world. If you want to liberate a country, said an Egyptian activist, give them the internet. And if that's too much hippie bullshit, numbers. An increase in internet maturity similar to the one experienced in mature countries over the past 5 years creates an increase in real GDP per capita of $500 US. So in 5 years, each person in a country can get $500 richer. By contrast, it took the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century 50 years to produce the same result. We are the new Thomas Edisons. We are the new Isambard Kingdom Brunels. We are the new Telfords. We are the new Edisons. We are the people driving this. Make sure you drive it for everybody. You can be a superhero. You can make your websites work in devices in the future that you've never conceived of. Just use the right tools, because the web is not computers. The web is not clouds. The web is these women in Africa. It's this blind guy in Toronto. It's these ladies I met on a bus in Bangladesh. It's this woman in Taipei. It's this farmer and his granddaughter I met in Cambodia. It's this guy on the metro in New York. The web is for everybody. Thank you for your time.